Hey, good afternoon, world. It's Patrick Lovell, TruthBomb riffing the con on Tuesday, January 23rd, 2024 at approximately 2:45 p.m. my time on the sixth day of the Sundance Film Festival. And I bring that up because it was the Sundance Film Festival that basically gave me an opportunity initially to do a lot of exciting things that I had been searching for in my career in the early 2000s, where I became a producer on a show that I created called the Festival Dailies, where I was able to basically hobnob and do a lot of filming and producing around films that had incredible stories that I got to do television sorts of introspections with the talent that would include, the actors and the directors and the filmmakers and all that sort of thing, and exposés. And the opportunity also allowed me to work with a lot of people that are very famous. I had done work with, features, I should say, on Robert Redford and Meryl Streep and Kevin Costner, Jennifer Aniston, Keanu Reeves, many, many others. And it was just something I was always very into because I've always been a big, big, big fan of film. I pursued film. I became a producer. Worked in LA for the 90s, and then I dropped out. And I moved actually back to Park City, Utah, because my parents were kind enough to allow me to take kind of a break from Los Angeles at the time. And I moved into Park City, where I worked my way into Park City Television, where I was able to ultimately create all of this programming that allowed me to become a big fish in a small pond, which was amazing. And it basically launched my career in a way that working in Los Angeles as a small fish in a big pond didn't necessarily, although all of the pieces created sequences and pieces of the puzzle that made me who I am, made me what I am. And it's kind of a bittersweet scenario, considering where I am and what I am trying to achieve, given what I've done with my production, The Con, and what the market is, and maybe where I think I should be in context to it all. But it's really quite extraordinary because one of my colleagues and a friend of mine that I have a great deal of respect for, he was always a fantastic talent. We worked very well together for a long time while we were doing this Sundance stuff. In addition, we actually used to announce and produce the high school football games in the state. And that was a really fun and a fulfilling, experience, and really cool, all things considered, and another stepping stone, quite frankly. But when we diverted from that time period at Park City Television and the Sundance Film Festival, I went into working, in television, and then I ended up working in film. And my colleague Josh did the same, and he wound up going to USC grad school for film. He got into a great program. He started doing some really amazing stuff because he had done some amazing stuff at Sundance. He got involved with the Sundance Institute. He's just a terrific talent. One thing led to another, and he's probably one of the premier comedic directors in Hollywood today. And he had a film last night that premiered at Sundance that is creating a lot of buzz. And it stars Will Ferrell in a film called Will and Harper, which is a documentary film about Will Ferrell's true life best friend who apparently became trans. And Josh decided to document it. And Josh had been working with Will Ferrell's company for some time on a number of things. They did another film that I think premiered at Sundance in 2021. But anyway, I was reading the trades today, and it was amazing to see his success. And here I am, and I'm going to be seeing him shortly, and I'm going to see his film this week, and all accolades and kudos to him. But for the past several days, I've also been immured in the Sundance Film Festival, as I have been for years, and a lot of the same people I dealt with over a decade ago are still in the same kind of premier positions, and that gave me a lot of access and a lot of fun to see a lot of really cool things and to take part. And Sundance is really, the idea of Sundance is, this mecca of independent film. It was launched by one of America's greatest talents, Robert Redford, who had created the Sundance Institute to, offer alternatives to studio projects. And I think they launched in 1983. I mean, maybe that was the Sundance Film Festival. It was actually U.S. Film Festival first, but it ultimately, started snowballing because, I mean, my God, it's only Robert Redford, and Robert Redford's probably one of the greatest actors in history, quite frankly. But he created this institute. There were labs, there were things that great actors would come to and facilitate and develop scripts and work together, and this whole, sort of symphony of talent that started to develop independent films that were working outside of the studio system. And, some of the earlier projects included incredible breakout hits like Steven Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape. And one of my favorite filmmakers of all time was developed at the Sundance Institute, Quentin Tarantino. In fact, I think his first, breakout hit, I don't think it was his first film that he wrote, but it was Reservoir Dogs, and that was developed at the Sundance Institute. And I've always had this love relationship with Sundance from that perspective. I mean, just celebrating, great genius and, all of the development and some of the incredible films that had come through Sundance. I mean, I'm reminded of the Coen brothers, The Big Lebowski, my God, the Blair Witch Project, so many documentaries, it's hard to count. And this year's Sundance Film Festival lineup included two absolutely amazing documentary films on two things that are close to my soul, my heart. Lollapalooza, the Perry Farrell experience, and then Brian Eno, and that that era of Brian Eno influence, both of which, both Perry Farrell and Brian Eno are huge influences in all the music that I've listened to, throughout decades, and to have them in my back door, and the things that come with it, the parties and all of the people that were involved and all of these other things. It's just absolutely remarkable. But it's interesting in so much that Sundance brings to mind, this sort of conversation that I was having yesterday with my colleague, Kevin Howard, where we asked the question, what is capitalism? Because film is an art form. And the idea is to connect with people with real stories, with real people, to inspire, to dramatize, to horrify, to do all of the things that we experience in theaters that people like me grew up with, to become inspired to want to become a part of the filmmaking process. And, I've written screenplays for a long time. I've had, big dreams, some of which unfortunately fell short, some of which went in different directions that I could never imagine. But I wound up becoming, in the process, an investigative reporter. That's not really what I am. An investigative journalist / producer, independent producer. So you would think that, given my background and what I did, that I'd be kind of like the glass Cinderella slipper fit into Sundance. But not really, because Sundance isn't exactly what it once was, and Sundance is a different sort of scenario, even though there's a lot of greatness that comes from Sundance. But both Sundance and Park City have kind of grown in the last 15, 20 years, as has the entire country. And so the way I want to frame this such that you can kind of understand the confusing sort of times that we live in is to consider for a second that Sundance is really the preeminent American film festival. I mean, it's one of the top 3 film festivals in the world. I put it up there with Cannes, and what else is up there? I mean, really, it's Cannes, Sundance, and everybody else kind of falls from there, to be quite frank with you. Although great films come out of different Sundance film festivals around the world, and most of the major film festivals like Berlin and Venice and that sort of thing are also huge in terms of distribution. But all of these things require a system. All of these things require finance, which requires capitalism, and entrepreneurs and vision makers and people that take chances and do things to put things together to hopefully, if they get a breakout, an opportunity to do something that both, financiers and distributors marry with great filmmakers, then they create products that people see and pay to see. Now, there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes in terms of also nonprofits, for example. So, like, if you look at the sponsorship list of the Sundance Film Festival, they have listed people who've donated $1 million, $500,000, so on and so forth. And there's usually a lot of very rich, institutions, shall we say, nonprofits that come from, or foundations that come from huge, companies, financial situations, financial companies, all sorts of manner, shape, or form of people that, might invest in, projects that can have an impact on the greater good, that can also be nonprofit. But yet, of course, the money's coming from somewhere, and that money was made somehow that would ultimately go into this sort of situation to bring magic to people that would change people's lives. In fact, looking at some of the headlines of what the press is saying about my friend's film, Will and Harper, is that it's going to save lives. And I'm sure it will. And I'm sure it was a fantastic film, and I can't wait to see it. But in context to the festival itself, how it's built, what it's supposed to do, it's this sort of self-proclaimed, very indie, risk-taking, courageous adventure, to bring the best voices to tell the most important stories. But what Sundance has really become, like everything else, it's kind of what they celebrate is an intersectionality, self-proclaimed, and an identity politics sort of scenario where a lot of the films that are documentaries or dramas or narratives and that sort of thing will feature stories of people coming of age, sexual exploration for all types of people, and the things and the challenges that they, obviously the obstacles that they have to encounter and overcome and you connect with on a human level. Those are extremely important films. Again, we've got to celebrate the human experience one way or another in this very saturated time where really the big sort of Marvel comic fantasy films are the ones that are going to take a lion's share of our attention at theaters these days and have for now years. And we live in a very strange world post-COVID where my friend Josh, who's one of the best comedic directors in Hollywood, has said that there's really not a market for comedy in theaters, which is insane when I think of the films that I grew up with. And I've actually likened my friend to a modern day John Hughes. I asked him himself, I'm like, my God, that's what it seems like they're grooming you to be. And he's like, I'm lucky. And he's not lucky. He was a very incredible talent. But, for me to think of John Hughes and John Hughes films like, 16 Candles, or if I think back to the 80s, an Animal House and, National Lampoon or, Blues Brothers or any manner, shape, or form of, comedies. I mean, that was a huge Caddyshack, for example. That was a huge impact on my life and set the tone of my sort of personality and my sense of humor for the rest of my life, which I experienced in theaters. And now that's not a communal thing. So a lot of people can't get together and laugh in a public arena theater and then have, quotes to talk about for the next 30, 40 years in ways that people that are on the same page get to know one another because we have the same sense of humor. I mean, it really has a kind of a caustic downstream effect when that sort of thing is taken out of what I would call the marketplace because of the nature of the way we consume media these days on platforms and streaming and all of those other things. But then again, that changes the financing trajectory of how a lot of these things operate. And also, as in terms of what film festivals are willing to show and bring to the population writ large for very important stories, whether it's comedy that's going to move our lives or connection or very important revelations of investigative muckraking journalism that revealed the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history in the world that a festival like Sundance isn't interested in. And I know that they're not interested in because I'm connected to a lot of the top people in their management. In fact, I was hanging out with their top sponsorship director the other day, who's a very close friend of mine. And we were hanging out at none other than the Chase Sapphire Lounge. And the Chase Sapphire Lounge is a place where one of their premier sponsors, which is JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank in the United States, has a central presence at this giant film festival with incredible celebrities and musicians and people from all around the world that come to visit. And quite frankly, the people that come to visit in an elite ski town are the people that can afford it. They're people who can afford these incredibly expensive, rich second homes in this extraordinary ski town, of which I called home for 23 years. And I've had a footprint in there for the last 40 years. And I know inside and out, and I've seen the growth, and I know exactly what it's expanded into, much of which is undergirded by all of the stuff that I reveal. financialization, real estate fraud, all of the things that happen in that industry. And yet, that is the home of the Sundance Film Festival. So the people that are the patrons, the people that are paying $4,000 for a tickets and all of the things that go with it, that could go to the Sapphire Lounge, right, where they're on a list or they show a badge and they get to go in and that sort of thing, and they can hobnob with filmmakers and other people that are a part of the scene. And then they also have panel discussions where people come and they, talk about things that are important to the people that are at the festival, a lot of which are the same sort of subjects that I have just revealed to you. And so I was at this fantastic party, and again, I'm experiencing it and loving it myself, right? But I know exactly who Chase is. I know, and I've been revealing this to you in my Truth Bombs, that JP Morgan Chase, and I thought about doing this Truth Bomb, my friends, with a megaphone in front of the Chase Sapphire Lounge. But I thought other of it, because I really do love the Sundance Film Festival. I do know that it's done much more good than me being a little bit cynical or critical of some of the things that I'm revealing to you. But again, it's just such a fantastic platform, and it's done so much to influence Hollywood and everybody else. I mean, it's just, I hold it in such high regard, but at the same time, the point of this is to understand money in the markets and what we can see and what we can't see based on who the gatekeepers are. And so I'm talking to my friend who's the sponsorship director, and he's got a couple of friends from Greece, of all things. And I happen to have a relationship with one of the most incredibly inquisitive, intelligent geniuses on the planet who hails from Greece, a guy by the name of Yanis Varoufakis. And I've interviewed him here on these Truth Bombs, and I happened to engage with the stories with them, and we started talking about Chase, and we started talking about Giannis, and we started talking about the entirety of how this whole thing works, and they were extremely knowledgeable. They didn't know a lot of the details that I informed them on, and we've created a relationship, and hopefully that's going to broaden and scale. But it was ironic that we're hanging out, and it was also probably a little bit of hypocritical, that I am having a great time at this incredible party lounge that is the premier sponsor. That is probably, I think, the main reason why we didn't get our work in the Sundance Film Festival, because the gatekeepers know that you can't, they know where their bread is buttered. They know who has, who's delivering the money and who not to piss off for a whole lot of reasons. But that is part and parcel to the reality of our world. And so, if I had the megaphone and if I was standing in front of the Chase Sapphire Lounge, I'd say things like, how many of you film goers that are enjoying this thing that have all sorts of important things to share and be a part of, and you've got, very, I'd say, significant opinions on certain, things that you're sharing here at the festival, like everybody else is, including, of course, what was happening in Gaza, and that, predictably transpired. But I'd say, how many of you are aware that Chase, for example, over the course of the last, I think it's pretty much 15 years, has paid over $9 billion in fines while receiving something on the magnitude of over $500 billion in emergency lending apparatus. And they're small on the list in terms of the amount of money that they received through the apparatus of the Federal Reserve and the emergency lending apparatus post 2008. To give you an idea, Citigroup, I think, is up to 1.4 trillion. Bank of America was like 1.3 trillion. Wells Fargo was way up there. Goldman Sachs was about the same as JP Morgan Chase. But I'd say, in addition to the initial impact of a $347 million conflict of interest settlement that they were involved with basically deceiving investors that would have been a part of, quite frankly, high risk, high net wealth investors that would have been part of the Chase Sapphire Club. That's the beginning of a domino that went for the last 13 years that led to over $9 billion in fines for criminal activity that included the London Whale, which after Dodd-Frank was passed, that was trying to put down in law that you're not supposed to create derivatives based on all of the intricacies of the things that we revealed to you in the con. But they did anyway, losing billions upon billions of dollars, which is effectively these giant casinos with all of these, what they call the London Whale. high net worth players. Okay, fine. So maybe some of you are thinking to yourself, well, those first two examples were just rich people getting drilled. So, hey, no problem, no foul. They deserve to get drilled anyway. Yeah, but no, because the law is the law. And if the law is the law, then everybody should be, dealt with equally, quite frankly, based on the statutes, based on, the remedies, and based on what the law actually is, and the degrees of felonies, and so on and so forth, that lead to all sorts of other revelations. In addition to that, I wanted to say in front of the Chase Sapphire Lounge, did you know that JP Morgan Chase was fined $13 billion after the 2008 great financial crisis, and they settled, I think it was in 2016, by basically putting a muzzle on a major whistleblower by the name of Elaine Flashman, who happened to be on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, because when Matt Taibbi was actually a journalist, that's what he brought to the fore to reveal all of the things that she knew. That was basically the con that we show you in our work, the con at www.thecon.tv, that all of the banks were involved with. But JP Morgan Chase, again, got a slap on the wrist, a deferred prosecution, agrees to pay $13 billion because they had a personalized relationship with then Department of Justice Attorney General Eric Holder. I think, JP Morgan, sorry, sorry why I'm stalled. Jamie Dimon. Wow, my mind was thinking about a lot of things, but CEO Jamie Dimon met with Eric Holder behind the scenes, 57 times to do a one-on-one, how are we going to work this out? And again, a little bit of a problem with a conflict of interest of the nation's largest bank that was also, dealing directly with the Department of Justice. When you're an investigator and a prosecutor, you never meet with the target of your investigation. That's ridiculous. But that's the kind of power JP Morgan Chase has, and most notably Jamie Dimon. So if you're counting, that's 3 major charges that were all felonies. And then the fourth that I'm aware of is a RICO conviction of Chase for insider trading in the precious metals market, which happened just a couple of years ago, over I think $7 billion. I can't remember what the number was, but another ginormous fraud that all has happened under the CEO's watch. And each and every time Jamie Dimon doesn't get humiliated in the press, the stock of JP Morgan Chase goes up, and he gets more and more credibility as basically the godfather of Wall Street. Now, in addition to these things that I've just mentioned to you, it was Jamie Dimon that was put in the pole position during the Bear Stearns bailout, the backdoor that created what we call Maiden Lane 1, 2, and 3, that developed illegally tens of trillions of dollars to purchase toxic assets after the bank, after the what am I trying to say? When you had it was the critical mass, right? It was the critical mass based on what was happening with John Coffey, and I can't remember the other hedge fund guy at Bear Stearns, but they were all doing all of the same things that I showed you in the con, and then ultimately Goldman kicked over because of the nature of what we call the repo run that was basically preceded the Big Short, which is another part of this whole thing. And in looking back, it looks to me like everybody knew the Federal Reserve was going to come up with what we then called the Greenspan put, which was Alan Greenspan kicking in tens of trillions of dollars of liquidity illegally to systems that got bankrupted through all of these mega maniacal racketeering schemes. And by the way, that precious metal conviction that I just told you about, that was racketeering. That was RICO. And RICO should be the death penalty for any business that is convicted of felonies, but they always do these deferred prosecution agreements and these huge settlements that the Department of Justice is okay, they wipe their hands on. But if you look back at the $13 billion settlement that Chase had, that blew up literally tens of millions. The Chase, they were probably one of the biggest vectors of this whole thing. I bet they destroyed who knows how many millions of people, quite frankly. And everybody in the press is like, oh, they got theirs because they had to pay $13 billion. Meanwhile, people got train wrecked, got destroyed, their lives destroyed, all sorts of cataclysmic collateral damage, with suicides and bankruptcies and people out on the streets and divorces and kids that go to drugs and all of that type of stuff that happens when the domestic unit is destroyed, all of which, again, I show you in the con that wasn't actually able to be shown on this national, international, beautiful showcase of the Sundance Film Festival, because considering I was a local filmmaker who was actually the guy who was doing all the film festival programming to begin with, it would have made for a great story and everything else. But, you know what? Maybe it's a little problematic that I revealed what J.P. Morgan Chase and Jamie Dimon were getting away with. Now, in addition to that, if that weren't enough, it was recently revealed, and I've revealed this in my Truth Bombs, but nobody's talking about it with regards to what the Jeffrey Epstein story is. Okay, so we knew the list and all of these, personalities and the celebrity and the salacious gossip and everything else that's involved with Prince Henry to former President Clinton to Donald Trump to, Stephen Hawking to, of course, my favorite in this whole thing, Alan Dershowitz, among others, right? I mean, all of that smut is something that keeps people's interest in a not National Enquirer way. But it's like, okay, who was Jeffrey Epstein? How did he pull this off? How did he have access? And what was his financing? Well, anybody who's followed the story knows that he was involved with Wexler and all of these billionaire guys, that are also still all over the map, funding, all sorts of corruption with Supreme Court justices and politicians and all of the rest of it. But meanwhile, nobody's asking about the financing and who handled the funds. Well, as it turns out, it was J.P. Morgan Chase, who spent and leveraged and financed something on the order of $2.8 billion over the course of 15 years that they ended up just paying a, $270 million settlement to the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And yet nobody's talking about, wait, who was his general counsel? Where was the internal mechanisms to prevent something like this happening? We're talking about a sex scam and sex trafficking on a monumental scale with the most important people in the world. And oh yeah, by the way, as it turns out, the FinCEN files revealed that there was over 2 million suspicious activity reports. FinCEN is a process through which the banks themselves are supposed to put up these suspicious activity reports to the Department of Justice to investigate when people are money laundering or involved with drugs or racketeering or any of these horrible situations that enable, for example, terrorism or international drug laundering and everything else. But all of those things have always been a part of the global economy. And as it turns out, oh yeah, J.P. Morgan Chase, which many on Wall Street regard as the ultimate money launderer, which it appears that they are, were involved with laundering money from all over the world. And it appears that this Epstein situation is just one piece of the dynamic. And oh yeah, by the way, I learned not too long ago that, and it doesn't surprise me, that Jamie Dimon and Sandy Weil, who created the entire mega merger of these supermarket banks by killing Glass-Steagall in the late 90s, because they just had that sort of influence and they played the game with all the guys of that era, including Phil Gramm and his wife, Wendy Lee Graham, who led to such greatest hits like Enron, for example, and the derivatives trades and the off the bank's balance sheets and all of these other games of financialization that ultimately are just criminal racketeering, soup to nuts, that lead to all sorts of insane mad behavior. And when I'm saying what they were doing back at that time, so Sandy Weil and Jamie Dimon basically, well, Sandy Weil got booted out of Wall Street. Jamie Dimon went with them. They got involved with predatory lending in the Baltimore area before they put it all together to be able to create a coup d'etat at Citigroup. And they did so when basically Travelers Insurance they were about to go bankrupt because of a big hurricane down in Texas. And ultimately they were able to piecemeal all of the stuff together through deregulation because they were working with all of the guys down in Texas, particularly Phil Gramm, that led to the death of Glass-Steagall, that created this umbrella supermarket banking so they could create all of these situations. And at that time, it turns out, lo and behold, Jamie Dimon and Sandy Weil were also financing a version of Air America, the CIA's airline in Europe, involved with all sorts of stuff. Who knows what? It was, like not drug smuggling, more like arms smuggling. Who knows, right? And by the way, when you think about it, when you pull the lens back from Jamie Dimon and Chase and you look at the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell came from where? Carlyle Group. He wasn't an economist. who you would think would be at the apex of the largest central bank in the world, that all of the other central banks rely on. No, it turns out he was a general counsel for this giant military industrial, hedge fund. Oh yeah. So if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know, not to mention Jerome Powell, who is our current Federal Reserve Chairman, yeah, he and his buddy, God, out of Dallas, Kaufman, I think it was Kaufman, they were involved with insider trading between 2019 and 2020. This stuff is happening so fast, so furious, and nobody can keep up. And I wanted to just say this out in front of, the Chase Sapphire Club at the Sundance Film Festival to say, oh yeah, this whole independent film, facade is basically home to these backdoor guys that are involved with criminal stuff up the wazoo that controls the world. And have you seen a film about it at Sundance? No, you haven't. You haven't. But I didn't do it, man, because I do have so much respect for Robert Redford. I do have so much respect for everybody that I've dealt with. I'm so happy that they created this platform for my buddy Josh Greenbaum to be working with Will Ferrell in this, Will and, I said it earlier, I can't remember the name, but, this film that's going to, make a lot of waves. And, there are just so many important, beautiful things that come out of the Sundance Film Festival, but it's not the situation that I continue to reveal to you, every day. And I had an interview. Well, let me set it up this way. Yesterday, I come across this interview with this guy, Cox is his last name, and I recognized him because he was in an infomercial, but he just happened to appear on the Lex Friedman podcast. And it's this 6-hour podcast with this guy who was a broker. He was just a con artist, fraud freaking scheme. And the headline was this guy, was able to bilk $55 million and he winds up in jail. Anyway, if you listen to that interview, he's a broker, an originator, a guy that we show you in the con that's kind of like the tip of the spear for this entire madness that they don't discuss in the 6-hour podcast with Lex Friedman, for example. But as I'm listening to this interview, the level of sociopathy, of sycophant, of criminal behavior, of literal insanity is like every other word that you can't make up. And I'll give you an example. So, for example, this guy was all about identity theft to be able to create this loan theft on banks because he understood the system of which we show you the entire assembly line in the con, but he only knew this much of it, but he knew how to do grift on banks because he was able to steal and loot from the banks using a bunch of different identities. And it got so bad till he got to a point where he was like, oh, wait a second, I can't use real identities because it's going to blow up in my face if somebody gets a DUI and I happen to get caught, and then it creates a domino, or many other factors like, well, you could just imagine, right? If you can't control, the people. So he had to find the perfect people to steal their identities that couldn't be tracked. So he targeted homeless people. He targeted homeless people to use the grift in the banks to create fake documents, to create straw buying, to loot millions of dollars from the banks because of everything we show you in the con that he's not even aware of. But he got away with it for a very long time. And he started to reveal that, oh yeah, everybody was in the mix. The appraisers, the lenders, everybody in the agencies. But he couldn't understand why. But he was just like, everybody was just getting a piece, right? No harm, no foul. We're all kind of helping each other out. But that's the sociopathy of this freaking numbskull who was, he kept saying, well, at least I'm not a violent criminal. Meanwhile, he was destroying people left and right, not to mention, basically lifting identities of people that had already been destroyed. Okay, so Lex Friedman is asking this guy these questions on top of this other interview that I got this morning, and I'm going to do more and more of these interviews that I'm going to give to you because I'm going to create my own platform that I'm doing on my own without any assistance, because so far, the American people, all the American people buy are lies, and I should be watched and viewed by tens of millions of people considering the information I have, but I'm lucky on occasion to get like 1,500, which is a good day for me. But this information is huge, and I know I'm being throttled by, X, like I've revealed before, throttled by film festivals, throttled by mainstream media, throttled by everybody in the consortium of this tool, this insane circus of everybody playing ball with the griftopia that has absolutely control of our country. And in the interview I did today was with this guy who was a former top guy at the SEC. He deals with pensions and everything that's going on there. And the grip that he's revealing is just as insane as the grift of the originator that Lex Fridman's 6 Hour podcast revealed yesterday, but it's across the board. And that's what I am providing you. Meanwhile, the people like the Sundance Film Festival who put themselves up on high, who are kind of point people with like nonprofit groups, are like, we want to tell stories of humans and people that, change lives and save lives and are important. And, they all are important, but most of these guys are self-important, to be honest with you. And if they can tell you these stories, and they don't tell you the story that is making all of this like avalanche of fraud and corruption and destruction of everybody in this society, do you see the point? It's like I said this ironically yesterday, that I made a connection between the fountainhead of Ayn Rand's work and contrasted that to her work in Atlas Shrugged. And it's like, yes, you do have to have people that come up with great ideas and stick to their guns and do the greatest work to become the best selves they can possibly be. But no, you don't have to have a handful of millionaires who put themselves as billionaires above everybody else that have complete control of society because they can freaking, puppeteer everybody through grift. And that's all it is when you get to the end of the day and you understand the central bank of the United States for the last 15 years it's really more than that. It goes back to the late 90s that I'm aware of, but not to the level that it got to in 2008. From that point forward, it's been out of control. But we've provided tens of trillions of dollars to corrupted, bankrupted, racketeering financial enterprises that lie, steal, and deceive and cheat in ways that are so easy to identify, to prove, and yet nobody's doing anything. And that was my interview with Edward Seidel today. He's like, people just can't absorb it. It's too complicated. It's not complicated. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. But he's like, there is no market for people trying to stop corruption. And I kept hearing this over and over and over after he's giving me insights into details of analysis and things that he has discovered as it revolves around state pension funds, the largest state pension funds in the country, that they're the ultimate investors because they're firemen, and ironically police officers and everybody in the military and teachers and public works people and yada, yada, yada. And these pension funds are huge. But the pensioners can't see the prospectus. They don't know what they're investing in. There's this wall where there's no transparency, and the money managers literally refer to the pensioners as stupid money because they can they can get this money to put it in, and they overcharge on fees. For example, he gave me an example of, they would provide $1 million in consulting and charge $2 million for the fee. I mean, it was kind of like a baseline deal that was like absolutely ridiculous, but we're talking about billions of dollars of money money that they're managing. And then, of course, if you've seen the con, we show you how all of the predation and all of these things of consumption in our society can be twisted into this world of lies, like this guy that I just mentioned to you, Cox, that was on Lex Fridman. I highly encourage you to check it out because it's nauseating how insane this guy is. I don't think he has a high school education, and all he did was learn how to, lie, steal, and cheat on documents every which way to Sunday, and all the banks were letting him do it, and he got away with millions until he got caught. And he eventually got caught, but he got caught for stupid stuff. But at the same time, he knew something was up, but yet he built this this racketeering enterprise that we show you in the con, but he didn't know it was a racketeering enterprise. He didn't know what was illegal. And he kept, comparing himself to somebody like, I'm just a white collar guy that, fraud guy that, I don't hurt anybody. I'm a good looking, soft guy. I'm not somebody who can go to prison. But meanwhile, he's destroying, thousands of people on his own right. And then he's stealing. Think about how horrible that is. Stealing identities from homeless people that are living food to mouth in the most horrific conditions, and he uses their identity to steal from banks to the tune of millions of dollars. Do you not see it? From the bottom to the top, and to our media, to our government, and it's all predicated on revolving door. The final piece that I'll say on the actual pensions is the fact that, when I asked this guy, Ed Seidel, who's again he got the largest whistleblower complaint, and he lays out the whole thing, and it's really quite an extraordinary in conversation. You got to see it to believe it in context of this other stuff, in context of my work, because ultimately what he's saying is that, look, the states are running offense for the financial system that's paying for their campaigns, the gubernatorial campaigns, the state legislatures, everybody else, to make sure that they do not allow transparency, that they get the billions of dollars of state pensions funds, and they can loot it all day. And when it blows up, then it blows up the world, but then they get to go to the Federal Reserve to get tens of trillions of dollars given to them illegally, because it's all an inside job. Now, interestingly enough, I'm glad I mentioned that, because I was told by my friends at Sundance that, initially when they heard about my work in the con, they weren't doing the full series, programming where they could show you many different episodes of the same thing. They didn't do that until just like last year or something, 2 years ago. I guess it was O.J. Simpson. But the long and the short of it is that he said, a lot of people who don't know this thing were confusing it with Inside Job. They were like, well, wait a second. Is this a lot like Inside Job? No. Inside Job, which came out of Sundance, which won the Academy Award in 2011 by a guy by the name of Guy Ferguson, who's a great filmmaker and who had this legendary Academy Award speech where he's like, look, nobody who's done this stuff has gone to jail. And it's incredible. And he gets this standing ovation, and he's on the world stage and everything else. Meanwhile, the next day, crickets, right? And ultimately, he writes this follow-up book, because when I saw the Inside Job, and I loved it, and ironically, again, to put all of the last 13 years into perspective, it was voiced by Matt Damon, one of the greatest documentaries really of all time. But Matt Damon goes on to be involved with what? The spokesperson for crypto? Crypto is so involved with fraud. We just saw, Sam Bankman-Fried and all the rest of it. And it's just like, oh my God, there's that convergence with Larry David and celebrities and everybody else who don't know any better probably. And they're just like pawning because they're getting paid, and then everybody else gets blown up on it. This is our system, but the system doesn't need to be that way, because it's just a con. It's a major freaking grift. And so, ultimately Ferguson, who was the director and the filmmaker of this genius film, that it was so early to the game, it got most of it right, but it got so much of it wrong, because it ultimately blames it on academia, because it didn't know where to go. Because it was like, oh yeah, the academics who do these white papers that say what's going on in the economy, and their economists and their models and everything else, they can kind of create a plausible deniability for why all of this stuff went down. They're just useful tools in the fool circus. They're useful idiots, okay? Yeah, okay, that's cool. But no, it was a lot more than that. And ultimately, this guy, Ferguson, he does a follow-up book called Predator Nation that nobody heard a peep about. I didn't even know that existed until I was 3/4 through the con, when I ended up reading it in, I think, maybe 2018, 2019, something like that. And I was like, holy shit, that has a lot of the same ingredients of what we showed, but he missed quite a bit as well. But it was a brilliant, brilliant piece of work. But it's like, oh, wait a second. Nobody knows about that book. Well, it's because, again, the likes of Sundance and mainstream media will not tell you this story, because they're all getting paid by it. They all have conflicts of interest. They're all going to give you a little bit of this and that, and they're going to get everybody fighting each other, and they're going to get everybody. Look, man, I've told you a million times. Donald Trump is, I believe, guilty of everything that they've got him on and so much more. But he is also, the government is demonstrating that everything that Donald Trump has done, from the documentation fabrication, the electoral scheme, to the racketeering with Giuliani and all of the people that were involved, to utilizing through the criminal fraud exception all of the corrupt attorneys, and then ultimately a corrupt judge, which looks like Judge Elian Cannon, that is as big as it seems because of the election and everything that's going on, and of course January 6th and yada, yada, yada. That is tiny, 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 tiny compared to what I'm revealing to you, and it never ends. It gets worse every single day. So where do you go with that? I don't know. Can you share this? Can you like it? Can you get more people to go, hey, Patrick's the dude that everybody needs to listen to? It's like, it's just the opposite of a boy who cried wolf. It's the boy who's got the fucking mega biggest goddamn evil in the shadows, the greatest trick the devil ever played that ever exists, to convince the world that it didn't exist, because I've got the whole thing soup to nuts. I know everybody, and I'm just a regular guy. I am, and I looked at, by the way, the age of Will Ferrell, and it blew my mind because Will Ferrell is just a year older than I am. I thought he was a couple of years older than I am. I knew that he went to USC with a couple of buddies of mine that I was friends with in high school, that they were in the same fraternity together. But for some reason, I thought he was a little bit older. But it really put things into perspective because Will Ferrell's been a superstar for decades. As has, by the way, in, Gary Sanchez Productions, his partner is Adam McKay. Adam McKay is my age too. Adam McKay is a genius. He's written so many great movies, including none other than The Big Short. But The Big Short is a tiny, tiny piece, and he got most of it wrong, actually, in the end, even though it was a great film and the last 5 minutes covered for it. But it wasn't the con. It's not the story. I keep telling you that the federal government has the DOJ, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, other agencies within the FBI and white collar. They spend north of $10 billion or $90 billion a year with tens of thousands of employees. They couldn't get this right. I did with a budget of $4.5 million that took years of my life to get all the right people to get what was the $29 trillion truth in 29 that became the $33 trillion truth that morphed into the $49 trillion truth that then became what? The $69 trillion truth. And we're north of that because of all the things that have happened in COVID. I mean, my God. People, we can't fix anything. We can't fix systemic, we can't fix, the climate problem. We can't fix the problem in prisons. We can't fix all of these problems that are important to people unless you fix the corruption. And I am the gateway to that. And I've spent years doing this, and I've stayed focused on this. And fortunately, yeah, I do have some other things going on in the commercial realm that aren't this. But I will tell you this. Even when you're playing in that world, you got to be careful of where the money's coming from, because the whole world, if you're talking about high dollar value stuff, typically it's tied to something that has illegal thumbprints all over it. Whether it's money laundering or bad mojo, or, my God, guys, this is what we have become. And what I'm telling you is it's not capitalism. It's not free market capitalism. It's not democracy. It's a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism to guarantee the mafiocracy that is now fueling fascism. Said another way, absolute corruption, absolute power corrupts absolutely. When a group of power players in society discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. And yeah, all of the best actors, including the Sundance Film Festival, don't see, don't hear, don't talk. Come on, people. We're better than this. It's just a deception racket of monumental proportions that have given shit tons of money to a tiny percentage of the people of this country. They're modern day kings, robber barons, oligarchs, pharaohs, whatever you want to call it. We've got to create a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption. And I am leading that because I've got the evidence. We've spent years and years and years in doing it, unless you want to create a revolution. And I think that's the only way that's got to go, one way or the other. Bernie Sanders was like, we need a political, economic, and a consumer-driven revolution. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, right? But I'm not talking about a bloody revolution where we have a coup d'etat, which would be the third one in the last, since 2011, really. It was 2009, I guess. It's just the Federal Reserve and all that kind of stuff because of what Wall Street got away with, which gave us MAGA. So, look, man, the only alternative to that, and what is my mission? Our mission is to create the clean New Deal. We've got to have the Pecora investigation that builds everything that we've already done in the con with all the people that did it in the con. We just need the critical mass of tens of millions of you to support it, to clean up this madness so we can use the power of government, and all of these laws are on the books. All we need is a critical mass of people to say, we're not going to take this anymore. And the only way we can do that is we've got to put a president in office that's not beholden to the system. And yeah, we've got our ideas on who that is. I think it's Sean Fain right now. I hope it's going to be Sean Fain, the president of the UAW. He's the right guy, but everything I've heard from him, he's in the right space. He doesn't know the details. And I'm telling you right now, when you learn that pensions, state pensions, especially pensions from the UAW, they're thought of as stupid money by the money managers, that the government's going to make sure you don't know what they're doing with the money. Just like most people don't know what happened to Social Security. It's been spent all over the place. Guys, the easiest return on investment for the corruption is to buy a politician. We've got to end two things right away. We've got to end the repeal of Glass-Steagall. We've got to separate commercial banking from investment banking, and we got to quit allowing, these money managers to play with other people's money in this casino scheme of gambling, which is fraudulent. That's going to be guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States. That's got to end. That's such an abomination to what the United States is supposed to be, because it's destroying everybody. But you got to also simultaneously get rid of Citizens United. Why? Because Citizens United gives all of these guys that are looting all of this money the ability to pay for the campaigns, and the politicians are not working for you. They're working for the money. So it's, like I say all the time, it's we are not a government of, by, and for the people. We are a government of, by, and for the corrupt corporation. The Supreme Court is under the thumb of the situation. Literally, Congress, media, all of the vestiges of power are involved with this, which makes us the Politburo, which makes us the same Russia that Stalin had. And capitalism is a myth, and free markets are a myth, and integrity is a myth, because you cannot have honest business when people loot, steal, and that's what they do. Everybody's looking for a shortcut. We gotta break the freaking glass. We gotta smash this into 1,000 pieces, and we can pick up the puzzle. And by the way, we know how to do this. We've got the people who know how to do this, and we've got the capacity to do it. We've got the laws to do it. We just need tens of millions of you to get involved. And then ultimately, I said Glass-Steagall, Citizens United. Yeah, we got to get a president involved who's going to force this issue, and we got to build a bully pulpit of tens of millions of people. That's the only way to break the bondage of this tyranny. And that's the exact same thing that our founding fathers did when we created separation of powers, when we revolted against the tyranny of King George III, which created the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And I'm just asking you to live up to what we put down on paper, because you should know the difference between character and hypocrisy, duplicity, and complicity. Honestly. I think we all pretend that, but everybody can lie. And so unless you want to create a revolution, unless you want to go fight and die for your country, which I'd prefer not to right now, I'd like to see justice using the system that's still there if we can get it before it completely collapses, before Trump enters the office. And the only way we're going to do that is if you invest, because Citizens United said you don't have a voice unless you invest. So I'm asking you to invest and donate $13 for, in consideration, in respect of the original 13 colonies. That's not much to ask. $13. If 13 million of you contributed, we'd have enough to do everything that is really what we have to do. And I know that there's been over several 100 million people destroyed by this system. So are you going to let guys basically go steal from, homeless people to where they can, get millions of dollars from banks because of the fraud that's existing, that's going to be backstopped by the Federal Reserve, and you just sit on your hands and do nothing? Are you going to join the movement? Because this is the clean New Deal. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt. This is the righteous grind. It's not rocket science, it's racketeering. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. Thank you for listening. Take a look at the description down below for the GoFundMe link. $13 today. Don't hesitate. Guys, we made you the $4.5 million project of the con that gives you the $70 trillion truth for free. For free. To reveal what the entirety of power has hidden from you. Please, wake up. Onwards and upwards.